All right, I think we're good to go. So, hello and welcome everyone to Inside the Application Literally. My name is Laurel Grodman, and I'm Assistant Dean for Admissions here at the Yale School of Management, and also a member of the Yale SOM MBA class of 2006. So, I'm very happy to be joining you here today. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, Jen and Modesta, who will be behind the scenes. This is not, unfortunately, an interactive session today. I want to be able to give you as much content about the application process, literally, as possible. We have a lot of other interactive events coming up if you have individual questions, but Jen and Modesta will be keeping an eye on the Q&A in case you have any quick questions that they can help answer with a link or a point in the right direction. So that's available to you as well. But as the title of this event implies, I'm going to open up our application literally and share my screen and provide a walkthrough of the entire application today live. It's a little bit different from some of our other event formats, like our best app advice or our app workshops, in that we're going to dive into some of the more technical parts of the application that sometimes get overlooked in general kind of advice sessions, but are really important. So that's the plan for this. And we'll also, hopefully, time permitting at the end, go through a couple parts of the process that happen after you hit submit, namely the video question, the behavioral assessment, and the interview. So before I open up the application itself, I do want to share a few words about the philosophy behind our approach to the application and how we evaluate candidates here at Yale SOM, which I hope will frame what comes when I open up the application in some useful ways. So although sitting down to complete a business school application can feel like a one-way monologue where you're telling us about yourselves, I really encourage you to think about it more like a dialogue. So the application itself is our part of the dialogue, the school's part, and it's really the admissions committee sharing with you what we find valuable, what we find important, and what we want to learn about you. And at SOM, we're very thoughtful about our role in this conversation. We spend a lot of time as an admissions committee identifying what matters to us in assessing candidates, and in turn, what information we need to collect from you within the application to get at that information. We put a lot of thought into how the application is constructed in order to present those questions to you. So the questions that you see and the prompts that you see within our application are really intentional and are part of the dialogue and hopefully saying quite clearly what we want to learn about you. And we try to be good communicators in this, and we hope that your experience of going through this application and absorbing the things that we're looking looking to get out of you are quite clear and streamlined. So with that, I'll note that the vast majority of what we collect from you in the implication we'll see in our reading process and in our committee process, but not necessarily everything and not necessarily all at once. So anything that we're collecting purely for statistical or reporting purposes, we as application readers won't see within the read, and I'll point out some other instances of information that we might not see right away as we go. But by and large, we're being really intentional about asking you for things only that are going to matter to our evaluation process. And so as for your role in the dialogue, as with any conversation, it's important to be both a good listener and a good communicator. So I hope that today I'll be able to help with the listening part and giving you a sense of not just what we're asking, but why we're asking it. And I hope that that will in turn position you well for your part of the conversation, which is sharing the relevant information about yourself and helping us connect the dots. So really at a high level, what we're asking you for can really be boiled down to three main areas we're looking to assess. Your academic potential. We want to set people up for success in what's an academically intense and rigorous environment here at SOM. We're looking for your evidence of professional impact, how you've operated in your professional environments as a leader, as a collaborator, as an employee, and how you contribute to the communities that you're part of. We want to bring people into our community who are going to be strong contributors, both during the time you're here at SOM and in the communities and organizations you join thereafter. So really everything that we ask within the application gives us information about one or more of those three areas. And I'll try to point that out as we go through the individual sections, what we're gleaning from each of those. We also believe strongly in bringing in students from a wide range of backgrounds and geographies and interests and experiences. We think it's essential to creating the kind of community that lives our mission of educating leaders for business and society, and we believe that students from an incredibly wide range of backgrounds and circumstances can thrive at SOM. And so, to this end, we've built aspects of the application that help us look at who you are, where you're coming from, so that we can understand those three elements that I shared in the context of your individual story that led you to this point in your trajectory. And that really lays the foundation for, again, the three kind of main areas that we're looking to assess. And so I'll try to point out where we're gleaning some of that information as well. So with that, I'm going to take a moment just to open up the application. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. And okay. So we will start at everyone's favorite part of the application, the instructions. Actually, this is my favorite part because we have been really thoughtful, I think, about putting together instructions throughout the entire application that are meant to guide you through exactly what we're looking for. So I'm thrilled that you're here and joining us today, and hopefully I'm adding some value to your understanding of the application. But even without this, I think we've put everything that you need in the application itself. So whenever you're navigating these individual sections, you can refer back to um, the instructions within them that will give you a clear sense of why we're asking you these questions, what we're hoping to get out of them, and some guidance in how you can make sure that you're filling them out in the way that will be most effective. So, a couple things that I'll share here. We also have, there's a link in here somewhere, and if not, we'll put it in the chat to what we call our application guide. That is another supplementary part of advice and information that you can reference as you're going through the application. If you're just looking for a little bit of a reminder and how to put your best foot forward in one of the sections. I'll note here that if you apply through any of our external application channels, namely Consortium and QuestBridge, all of the same things that I'm going to share today apply. You'll just see them through your application supplement versus in our live application here. So we review QuestBridge and Consortium applications in the exact same way that we do direct applications. So all of this is good advice for you as well. I'll note also here, just more of a logistical point. So you'll see our application deadlines here. We're nearing the end of round one, but we're approaching round two. And you'll see each of these application rounds will have what we call post-submission materials deadline. So that's the deadline by which you'll need to complete some of the post-submission steps, things like the video questions and the behavioral assessment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's also when we will need official test scores reported from you. So just bear in mind, they're each a couple of days after the application deadline, but just keep in mind there's a little bit more to do after you hit submit and make sure you carve out some time for it there. Um, Going a little bit out of order here, but note we offer application fee waivers in a number of different categories, and we actually have a sliding scale application fee for all applicants based on your income, looking to make this a more accessible process for as many people as possible. And so just make sure that if you are requesting a fee waiver, you do that in at least 48 hours before submitting your application, so you won't have any problems on the application day. The next thing I'll point out, this is a little bit of a newer area of guidance that we've shared within our application section, but we get lots of questions, as you can imagine, about use of AI in your application. And the position that we've decided to take here is that AI is a part of our lives. We're using it in our daily lives and our professional experiences in many different ways. And so we are not looking to prohibit your use of AI in approaching your application, but we do give some guidance on how to use it smartly and appropriately. And so I think probably the written components of your application, most specifically the essay, and then the spoken components, our video questions and our interviews, are the most kind of relevant places in which you may be thinking about using AI. And so essentially our advice for the essays and the written components are use it the same way that you would a trusted friend or a colleague who you're seeking advice from on your application process. It's okay to use for brainstorming and for idea kind of refinement, finishing touches, making sure everything is grammatically appropriate and that your spelling is correct, but you wouldn't have your friend or your colleague write your essay for you. And so the same advice should apply for your use of AI here. It could be used as a refinement and a brainstorming tool and for finishing touches, but your final product is not going to be authentic if it's something that you didn't generate yourself. When it comes to the spoken parts of your application, I'm just going to say don't. There is going to be no benefit to you to have a AI or really any other scripting coming into play there. Your own authentic, even if it's not perfect, voice is going to be way better than anything that's going to be generated on the spot or in advance through AI. So again, my advice there is just simply don't do it. It's never going to be to your benefit. So I'll touch upon that a little bit more as we get into the individual sections, but wanted to point out that guidance there. So with that, I think I will move into sort of the guts of the application, if you will. So the first thing you'll do is sign a statement of honesty. I'm not going to open that up right now, but that's very important to do as a first step. And then we start the journey with your personal information. So this is going to be pretty straightforward, demographic and background information for the most part. A couple of things that I will point out here are joint degrees, which if we go a little bit further down, we'll see. So I will mention Yale SOM has a variety of joint degree options available with some of our partner schools at Yale. If you are interested in pursuing one of those joint degrees, this is the place where you will indicate that. But what I'll note here is all of our joint degree processes are completely separate between the Yale School of Management and the partner school, meaning that you will apply separately to each institution. You will receive a separate admissions decision, and if you are jointly admitted, you'll have the opportunity then to pursue that joint degree. But just make sure that if you are intending to apply for a joint degree, you are applying directly through that partner school, and many of their deadlines are coming up in December and January. So good to be mindful about that. Again, this section is fairly straightforward, so I'm going to move right into the next couple of sections. So and thinking about that first area that I noted that we are exploring within your application and looking to get information about academic preparedness, we're really looking at a combination of things to make that assessment. Both your academics, so your record of your performance in undergraduate, as well as if you have a graduate degree or have done any other type of coursework, as well as your testing. And then lastly, and I'll get to this at the very end, we're taking a lighter touch with this, but we are looking at your behavioral assessments. So again, I'll get into that part of it in a little bit, but your academics are really a combination of your academic history and your testing working in tandem. There's no one sort of algorithm for how the two of those things are kind of play together. We're looking to triangulate information from a number of different sources. And so, for instance, if you studied an area that was very quantitative as an undergrad and performed very well in there, we may not be placing quite as much emphasis on your quantitative testing. Conversely, if you were studying the humanities primarily and didn't have very much exposure to quantitative courses in undergrad, that's totally okay. We'll take a closer look at your quantitative performance on the testing in order to gather that information. So again, there's no kind of cutoffs or absolute terms in which we're looking at both of those things, but we're looking for evidence in multiple places that you will be academically prepared to enter the program. And as I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit later about how the behavioral assessment fits into that as well. So within the academic record, this is where I'm going to say the instructions might be a little bit more boring, but they're really important. So there's a lot of specific information in here about how to present your academic record, and upload your transcripts. And the reason for this is the number one thing that holds up an application in review: missing transcripts, something that's not reported completely. And you don't want your application to get held up in review, because unless we can get that clarified and moved along, you know, we're not able to look at your application fully and move you on to the next stage. So just make sure you look at this all really closely. We have very specific prompts for how to deal with things like transfer credits and studied abroad. And this is, again, the kind of thing that is most likely to hold up an application. So just make sure you're able to move that along. There's instructions about things like including your transcript key, super important to give all the information that comes along with your transcript so we can evaluate, in the context of what your school provides. Information about, sharing your GPA or academic honors. So all of that is in there. Just make sure that you're taking a real deep look there. And then I'm going to scroll down here. You'll see this, I mentioned a little bit before, quantitative background. So one thing I want to emphasize here is we're interested in understanding your quantitative preparation and making sure that, again, between the testing and undergrad, we have confidence that you'll be able to excel in the quantitative courses here. But there is no explicit requirement that you have any kind of particular quantitative exposure. So we're going to ask you about your background in classes like accounting, calculus, finance, microeconomics, and statistics. But even if you have zero exposure to any of these areas, that's okay. Again, we'll probably look at the quantitative section of your testing a little bit more heavily, but none of these are prerequisites. We're looking to get a sense of your preparation, and we're also looking to get a sense of who would be a good candidate for what we call math camp. So this is a little bit of a preparatory boot camp that comes a couple of days before orientation for people who, again, haven't had as much exposure to these areas academically. So again, don't get scared off by this section if you're not able to complete many or any of this coursework. It's in part helping us gain information for after you're admitted and whether you'd be a good candidate for math camp. Moving on along. So college seniors, this is a good place for me to note. We have a really unique program that we call our Silver Scholars Program. And this is for students who are primarily in their senior year of college and who are looking to apply to business school. This is an opportunity to start business school immediately after undergrad. You could learn more about the Silver Scholars Program through the link that you'll see here. And its structure. But what I'll say here is it's incredibly important to self-identify as a Silver Scholar at this point in the application, because it will generate a different work experience page. Obviously, Silver Scholars would not have full-time work experience if you're still in college, so we're going to ask you a different set of questions about your work experience, having more to do with internships and research exposure and that kind of thing. So just make sure that when you fill out your application, you start in this section so that you'll get the appropriate version of the work experience questions. And the last thing I'll share on this page, you'll recall maybe that I mentioned at the start of our time together that there are certain sections of the application that we don't necessarily see all at once. This is a good example of it. So disciplinary review, I know will not apply to many of you, but if it does apply, if you've been subject to either academic or legal disciplinary actions. I know that this can be a really scary part of the application to be facing. We recognize that these circumstances are generated from a variety of different reasons. And I want to emphasize that having a yes answer to any of these questions is not the end of the line. We also know that sometimes this information in isolation can be really it can be really salient if it kind of appears in an application review. And so we actually took a step a number of years ago to remove this information from our initial reading process and committeeing process. And we actually only look at this information after an application decision has been reached. And then we use a separate subcommittee to review this information in context, gather any additional information if we need it, and kind of move forward from there. So again, like I said, this is a little bit of a different situation, and this is not information that we all see right away within the review process. Okay, moving on to test score. So I mentioned the academic section is largely anchored, the academic assessment's largely anchored in the both your academic record and your testing. So this is the test score section. Fairly straightforward. We take both the GMAT and the GRE. We have absolutely no preference between the two of them. We will continue to take the previous version of the GMAT until those tests expire, and of course take the current focus edition of the GMAT as well. We ask you here to provide all of the scores that you've received, not just your highest score. We will, of course, always take into account your highest score when assessing your application, but it's helpful for us to understand whether you have taken the test multiple times. Sometimes you might have a higher subsection score on a previous take. It's also helpful for us to understand we do offer feedback if you end up on our wait list, and sometimes testing feedback will be kind of determined by how many attempts you've already made. If you've already taken a test 5 or 6 times, I don't think we're going to suggest that you go and invest even more time in taking the test. So again, having that full history here and seeing that progression is helpful for us, even though we'll only kind of take into account your final and best, or I should say your best score when assessing your entire profile. A question that comes up a lot about testing is, can I send a score after the deadline? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is the earlier, the better. We do really make every effort to take into account updated information throughout the entire application cycle and let you put your best foot forward, even if that comes a little bit after the start of the round. But there's just no guarantees the deeper that we get into the round. So I certainly recommend trying to schedule those tests on the earlier end of the round if you're looking to retake, but certainly update us at any point within the round if you have an improved score that you'd like to share. Okay, so I think from here I'll move on to talking about that second bucket of areas that we're looking to assess that I mentioned, so your professional impact and experience. And we're really using a combination of the next three or so sections to get at an assessment of that. We're looking at your work experience, where you're looking to go kind of moving forward from your MBA, and your letters of recommendation. So we'll start with the work experience. So again, this is the section where if you are applying as a Silver Scholar, you'll want to make sure that you've identified that because yours will look slightly different. And actually, I see that I might have checked that box here. So oops, I'm going to go back a moment and show the non-Silver Scholar version of this. Okay. So, couple things about this section. One view of your work experience that we'll see that's really important is your resume. So that's where you'll represent all of your various professional and academic roles, any sort of extracurricular or other information that you want to share about your experiences to date. We do offer a template that you can use if you'd like. It's the template that we use for students once they are here at ELSOM and share their resumes in a standardized format, but you are not obligated in any way to use it. Whatever format you find best is totally fine with us. But that's where you are going to highlight your achievements and your accomplishments and what you've been able to demonstrate in your growth and again your accomplishments in each of the roles that you've had. The other way that we'll sort of get some information about your professional experience, and this is where I think, again, a standard application kind of workshop is not going to spend quite as much time, is your sort of list of employers. We actually ask quite a few questions within this section that help us understand your trajectory and your choices a little bit better. So for each of your employers, you're going to share, some fairly standardized information about your location and industry. Ask a little bit of information about your managerial experience, your direct and indirect reports. But here's where I think it's really kind of valuable to focus. So we ask you for a company description, a brief description of your role, your most recent role at that organization, and your reason for leaving if you're not currently there anymore. And what this really does is so the company description and your role description are really helpful if you are not coming from, I would say, an extremely traditional path or a multinational company that an application reader is going to be immediately familiar with. This helps and support that information so you don't have to spend as much real estate on your resume, kind of sharing what your company does and what you do at your company or organization. So use this space wisely again to give some grounding. And again, I think it helps us sort of equalize across applications so that there's no implicit favoring of companies that we're heavily familiar with or that kind of thing. And then the reason for leaving, I wish resumes had this section because sometimes it can be really challenging to look at a resume and understand the transitions in the way that you were thinking about them. So this is an opportunity for you to share a little bit more information about the choices that you've made. And so things that are not particularly helpful in this question or answering this questions are like, got a new opportunity or moved cities. Give us a little bit more about the thought process there. We know that you've transitioned roles, so give us a little bit more of the glue here as to why your trajectory has progressed in the way that it has. I'll mention here as well, we have space for sharing information about if you are a entrepreneur, if you've founded or co-founded a company, we ask a series of questions that we've actually developed in conjunction with our Dean of Entrepreneurship here at SOM, Kyle Jensen, to help us understand your venture in terms that are a little bit more relevant to that space versus an established company. So, an opportunity advantage of sharing as much information as possible about your entrepreneurial experience. All right, just moving on along here. I'll pause here on gaps in work experience. This is another area that, again, I think can serve as sort of glue within your application in a way a resume might not. If you've had a gap in your work experience after graduating of more than 3 months, or if you're currently unemployed, that's okay. People have all kinds of different career paths and trajectories. But it's super helpful to help us understand what that time meant for you and what you were doing and what that transition looked like. And it is not inherently a negative to have a gap or current unemployment, but rather than leave the committee guessing what was going on during that time, this is an opportunity to just tell us in a straightforward way. Then the last thing I'll note is about recommendations. We have a lot of resources that talk about choosing recommenders and things like that, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that now. But my general advice here is, unless you're a Silver Scholar, where you'll get a professor and a professional recommendation, standard MBA applicants will get 2 professional letters of recommendation. And the things that I always tell people to keep in mind are recency and proximity. So we want to know who you are today. So someone who can represent you either today or pretty recent to today is really beneficial to us. And then in terms of proximity, having someone who has been directly responsible for your development and your supervision is also incredibly helpful, more so often than someone who's a few levels senior to you. So those are the 2 sort of themes I would keep in mind for your letters of recommendation. And if you don't have a recommendation from your current supervisor, we'll ask you just for a brief note on why. It is okay if you don't, but again, rather than leaving us guessing, very acceptable answers here are, I'm not telling my current supervisor that I'm applying for an MBA program, or my current supervisor's only known me for a month. Again, these are totally okay, but we'll just ask you to clarify that so we're not kind of left guessing here. All right, so the work experience section is really the backwards looking, and I would say probably most important component of assessing your work experience in conjunction with your recommendations, because that's what you've actually done. Those are the behaviors and the accomplishments that you've had to date that we can assess. So in the balance of things, we're more interested in the things that you have already done than the things that that you are sort of looking to do. But that latter category is not unimportant. It's more that we know that interests can change over time. In fact, the vast majority of MBA students change their mind versus what they said that they were going to do on their application. So With that in mind, we still want to understand that you've given thought to the MBA journey and why you're looking to take this time and resource to embark upon an MBA. But we're also confident that even if your interests evolve or change, once you're in an MBA program, you'll be successful in making that pivot. So we ask you a question. I'm not going to call it an essay because it's fairly brief. It's only 200 words, but we ask you to briefly describe your career interests and how you arrived at them. What have you already done to pursue these interests, and what do you need to do going forward? So again, it's an opportunity for you to reflect on what you want to do. We're not looking for a 1, 5, and 10-year career plan necessarily. If you have a strong sense of the specifics of your direction, you're certainly welcome to share that. But interests can be broad. Interests can be something like, I have an interest in sustainability, and here's what I've done to explore that, and here's what I still need to do, without necessarily pinpointing an extremely clear next job that you're looking to take on. So again, 200 words, it's more of a statement than an essay. Uh, so we're looking for you to be relatively brief here. And then if you are pursuing a joint degree, we'll ask a little bit more information about that decision here. But again, joint degree decisions will be made independent of the decision of the partner school. And I mentioned recommendations already, and like I said, that's sort of the final component of your career experience that we're baking into assessing that area of your application. So I'm going to skip over recommendations, and now we get to the sections that are, potentially contributing to our understanding of a few different areas. So I mentioned the third area that we're looking to understand is your orientation towards being a productive member of the communities that you're a part of. We may be getting some of that information from your resume, and depending on what you've chosen to share there, we could certainly be getting that information from your recommendations as well. Activities is the next area. We are going to ask you to pinpoint your two most meaningful activities in your time as an undergraduate and then in your time postgraduate. Okay, you can share as much as you want on your resume, but we're really looking for you to highlight what you feel has been most meaningful to you in how you've engaged outside of the classroom. And in this section, I encourage you to think about it really broadly. I think when you hear activities, the things that come to mind tend to be, clubs or volunteer organizations or sports or those sorts of things, which is certainly viable candidates here. I'd also consider things like hobbies or personal pursuits, music, art, and so on. But also how else you've spent your time in meaningful ways. For some people, that's going to be familial obligations, caretaking, or helping support the household. So think about this really broadly and not just sort of in the traditional areas, because again, we're looking to understand what you've dedicated your time and talents to outside of the workspace here. And so with that, then moving on to the essay. Essay could potentially inform a number of different areas of the application. But again, kind of carrying on from the activity section, we're looking to understand what's truly meaningful to you. And we're giving you an opportunity to share that within the essay. So we ask you to complete one essay as part of the Yale SOM application, but we give you 3 prompts to choose from. So that's what you'll see here, numbers 1, 2, and 3. I really like to think of these all as the same question in a sense, just asked in slightly different ways. Again, we're really looking to understand here is what really matters to you and how you've approached it. So whether you choose the prompt that asks you about your biggest commitment, the community that's been most important to you, or the most significant challenge you faced, again, I think these are all shades of the same question where we're asking you to talk about something that's really mattered to you. And in doing that, it is both the topic that you've chosen, but I would say even more so your approach to that topic that we're really looking to understand. There's no right or wrong answer to this. I think if you ask yourself the question, what matters most to me? What's most meaningful to me? There's probably 2 or 3 things that come to mind. You can't go wrong with picking any of those. I would say pick the one that you feel most comfortable writing about and describing in concrete terms the way that you've approached it. Because again, we're very rooted at SOM in sort of evidence and looking for examples of behavior to predict future behavior. And so we're looking for how you've approached something that's really, really important to you and has really mattered to you. And you can frame that through any of these questions. Um, let's see. In terms of other kind of written materials, so like I said, only one required essay. This is the where you'll also see an opportunity. If you are a reapplicant, we'll ask you to give us a brief, just a summary of what have you been up to since your last application, what has changed, and it's less of an essay and more of just an opportunity to highlight for us any news since the last application. And optional information. So again, not an essay, and it is really truly optional, but this is your opportunity if there's something additional to note about any of the questions that we have asked you. This is an opportunity to provide a little bit more context there. It's not a good place to answer a question you wish we asked and we didn't, or something that we haven't asked about. But if there's something like your academics that we've asked about and you want to give us a little bit of additional context about why your performance in a particular semester was impacted by a health issue or whatever it might be, this is a good opportunity to give us a brief description of this. All right, so rounding out the application, as I mentioned at the top as well, underlying those three primary areas that we're looking to understand from you, we want to understand the context in which you've been able to achieve what you've achieved. So background information is one area that we might help understand that. We may get some of that information from your essay, depending on what you choose to write about as well. Recommendations might talk about it, so it's not exclusive to this, but the background information is entirely optional, but it's an opportunity for you to share a little bit more about who you are, where you're coming from, aspects of your childhood and upbringing that might be relevant to the choices that you've had available to you or that you've taken advantage of ever since. And so again, entirely optional, but very helpful information for us to have to better understand your full story. This is where we'll get information, for instance, about if you're a first generation college student. We ask some information about your family's background and education, get information about your family. And if there's any questions about your background or your upbringing that you feel like we haven't asked but would be relevant to our understanding, or if you want to elaborate on anything that you shared above, this supplemental detail here is an opportunity to do that. So again, we're trying to give you the maximum opportunity to share the things that matter to you and you think are important to your story. And so this is an additional opportunity to do that. Okay, in our last 5 minutes or so, I'm going to try to cover the things that happen after you hit submit. So once you've completed all that information and are ready to hit submit, there are a couple of final things that happen after that point. So the video questions and the behavioral assessment, as I mentioned at the top of our time, are things that'll have to happen in the handful of days that come after the application to make sure that we have your full application ready. So I'll touch upon both of those, starting with the video questions. So the video questions are an opportunity for us to add a little bit more texture and humanity to your application. You'll get a series of two different questions that are randomized and asked by a member of our team. And you'll hear the question and have 60 seconds to respond to it in a recorded format. They're really meant to do two things. For if you're a non-native English speaker, it gives us a sense of your English language spoken ability, and regardless of your native language, it gives us a sense of how you articulate your thoughts on your feet, which are a good skill to have in an MBA classroom as well as in life more generally. These are not going to be the most critical kind of anchor to your to your application. We recognize that this is a cumulative 2 minutes of your time. But again, it provides another kind of layer to your application and an opportunity for you to showcase yourself in a slightly different format than all the written materials that we're getting here. This is the area where, as I mentioned before, if you're thinking about using AI, just don't. It really doesn't go well. We've viewed thousands of these questions over time, and the ones that are scripted and the ones that are kind of generating content on the spot are just not what we're looking for, and are never going to be beneficial to you presenting yourself authentically. So, really encourage you. These don't need to be perfect. They just need to be you, and you'll do just fine. So that's my advice on the video questions and above and beyond that. Just make sure you find a nice quiet space. The whole thing shouldn't take more than 20 or so minutes, but you'll feel much better about it if your cat or your roommate is not walking by the screen while you're completing these, even if it makes our team chuckle to see that. Moving on to the behavioral assessment. So I mentioned this in the context of the academic section before. The behavioral assessment is about a 25-minute assessment that you'll take again after you hit submit. And unlike the GMAT or the GRE, which are considered cognitive assessments, this is what we call a non-cognitive assessment. So it's looking at interpersonal and intrapersonal skills that we know through our research are associated with success in the business school classroom. So we're not looking at this to assess for different kind of personality types that we want in the community, or we want, certain behaviors to be overrepresented. We actually are looking at this very specifically for academic success. We've done a lot of research with ETS who put this test together with us over time to understand for candidates who are not as strong in the academic areas that I suggested before, or who are, we have some concerns about the academic readiness. This test actually helps us better understand who is more likely to succeed in the classroom. So if you are incredibly academically strong already, we will not be using any information from this test. If you are completely, academically unprepared, which most of you are probably not, but if you're completely unprepared, the test isn't going to all of a sudden elevate someone to being prepared. But for candidates who are a little bit more borderline, may have had intervening factors during their time as an undergraduate, or you haven't been able to put as much time into preparing for the test as you would have hoped, this can be a bit of a thumb on the scale to help candidates in that position demonstrate their academic readiness. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a sense of how we're using this in the scheme of our application. And again, it's really meant to be a helpful factor for those who are academically not as clearly strongly prepared in the application process. So not something to stress about, not something to prepare over. It can only help in the end, and in many cases will not be, the factor that we're looking at most heavily for academics. All right, so the last thing in my final minute or two that I'll touch upon are interviews. So interviews are by invitation only. Everyone who we ultimately admit will receive an interview, but not everyone who applies will receive an interview. Interviews are truly given out throughout the course of the admissions cycle. So I always say someone has to be the first and someone has to be the last applicant to be reviewed. So the timing of your interview is not meaningful in that way. We do extend invitations throughout the entire round. And in fact, if you have a really meaningful update very late in the round, and we're able to respond to that, you may get an interview very late in the round. We may also waitlist people without an interview and interview you in a subsequent round. So all that is to say is I know it can be very stressful to wait for an interview, but I wouldn't read too much into the sort of timing of it. The things to know here is it's a structured 30-minute interview, most likely with a second-year student. So it's an opportunity for you to do a little bit of an interview as well and get to hear the experience and perspective of a second year who is going through the program and more of a peer to you. Even though it comes last in the process, it's not a gateway. It's not an up or down. It's not as though you made it to the interview and now everything is dependent on the outcome of that interview. It is one factor that we're looking at in conjunction with all of the things we just spent the last 45 minutes talking about. So it's not meant to be an incredibly stressful experience, but you'll want to prepare for it the same way that you would for generally knowing yourself and your story and your aspirations for the business school process, and you'll be just fine. And if I haven't said it enough times, the interview is not a good place for AI. End of story. All right. So the last thing that I'm going to share, and thank you for bearing with me through as I powered through all this. The last thing I'll share is I've touched upon this a couple of times. If you do have updates after you've submitted your application, we want to hear from you. You'll have access to an update form on your application portal. So both share things that are kind of materially different about your application, a new test score, a new job, a significant update that you want to share with us. Please do keep us actively informed. Absolutely share with us if you've had a job change. If you're changing jobs or between jobs, it's important for us to have your most relevant information and your most up-to-date resume as well, because your resume will be what your interviewer is working off of. So make sure that we're getting those things after the fact, and we'll do our very best to incorporate that into your application review. So I hope that this has been sort of a helpful, little bit of a deeper dive into some of these areas that aren't talked about quite so much in our application. And it gives you a sense of how we're pulling all this information together to assess your academic readiness, your professional potential, and your community engagement. As I mentioned, there's a number of other opportunities to hear from us and maybe ask some more individualized questions. We have application workshops coming up over the course of the next month. Bruce Delmonico, who co-leads our admissions office, and I will be doing our best app advice event early in December, where we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the philosophy around the application and some of the questions that come up most commonly from applicants that we engage with all over the world. And I mentioned before, our online application guide is another great place to look. And if you have any specific questions or are struggling with how to approach a very particular part of the application, you can always reach out to us at mba.admissions@yale.edu. And I, again, thank you for joining today, and very much look forward to having an opportunity to hopefully see many of your applications in the coming months, and wish you all the best. And if you celebrate, happy Thanksgiving coming up next week as well. All right, thanks everyone.